Greetings, greetings, everyone. This is Thandisizwe Chimurenga coming to you on Tuesday, April 8th with a special edition of Rootwork. This is the Build and Fight Formula, a series of educational sessions sponsored by Cooperation Jackson and presenting Kali Akuno, co-founder and co-director of Cooperation Jackson, based in Jackson, Mississippi, with this Build and Fight Formula, a plan for the transformation of society. This is our third, I do believe, is it not, Kali? Let me bring Kali up.
That is correct. Our third installment, if you would.
Third installment of about 8, 9, 10, 11, a whole year's worth of work.
Yeah, that's
we have for folks, right?
That's right. That's right. We'll be going through December. And given the new circumstances of Trumpflation, and we got to come up with a new coin of phrase. He wants to call it Liberation Day. I think I want to call it Peonage Day, but we'll play with it. But much of what folks like myself have been warning was coming to pass is now here, and so I think this is going to put what we've been talking about and what we've been planning on sharing, I think, in sharper contrast. But we'll get into it.
Well, can you do a brief, and I mean extremely brief, Kali, brief. Did I say brief? Can you do a brief recap of what we've been talking about before we get into today's discussion?
Yeah, if you can, if you put up the graphic, the graphic around the summary to start there, just to give folks a recap. The first one was in our series, which let me do a bit of self-promotion. Folks,
brief,
Kali, brief. Working on it. Go back and look at parts 1 and 2. 1 was the introduction, kind of the argument, if you would, to lay out why this particular rollout of practices and strategies could be transformational, both to deal with the times that we are living in, with the rise of fascism and the ascension of kind of the techno-feudal lords like Elon Musk and Peter Thiel. And the first one got into kind of the first element of what we would call a building block is mutual aid, what it is, why we need it, and how it should work to build solidarity within our communities to overcome some of the programming and socialization we've all had to endure the last 40 plus years of neoliberalism, which has fractured our communities, created a bunch of reactionary politics, primarily focused in and around identity that's often devoid of any form of class analysis. But trying to lay out within that why it is so necessary to build the type of unity and solidarity, to build a kind of a new society, but also some of the building blocks. So I would definitely want to encourage folks to go back and look at sessions 1 and 2. This is the deliberate third one, which is trying to take up where that comes off. And so the piece around food sovereignty, number 1, is just to deal with our folks, need to survive and have their caloric needs met, their nutritional needs met. But how do we ascertain that information if we're trying to produce based upon use values, right? Producing for what people need first and foremost, rather than producing commodities. How do we ascertain what people need? That is where a fundamental component of the mutual aid, that's why it's number 1, is there for us to start determining that need on a community, communal basis that does not rely upon creating these extensive database programs that either the government would control or private corporations would control, and how it's integrated in what you see here around, if you look at one of the bottom points, the need around open source technologies of how we have to gather this information in non-invasive ways so we know what people need and we can start planning and producing towards that, and then distribute it on a need-based basis based upon enhancing people's participation in broad community production. So there's an integrated piece that we're going to get into. And this, what you see, before you in this graphic, I'm not going to read it all today, just in the interest of time. But definitely check it out on our website. It will be posted here on the video and all of our social media posts on Facebook. What is it? Facebook, Instagram, X, and some of the other new platforms that we're going to get into. So hopefully that gives a short summary, Thandisizwe, and we can get.
All right. So now, what are we talking about today? What we talking about?
Well, first, I think we need to address what's going on in the world and how this fits in, right? So, one of the reasons why we need to push to enhance food production in our communities is to deal with the threat of food being used as a weapon against our people, against our communities. And do not take that lightly by any stretch of the imagination. I know some people, when I made this claim, want to cite that how readily accessible food is in this country. Well, if you look at the history of famines, and I'm going to give a shout out to another LA boy, Mike Davis, may he rest in peace, who wrote a book about pandemics and famines, right, that were associated with what we would now call climate change, that he specifically identified as El Nino. I want y'all to go look that book up. But one of the critical things is to understand, the famine that happened in India during the British Empire days, the famine that happened in Ireland during those Empire days, those were planned and calculated activities. It was not because there was a lack of food or that food production had collapsed. It was that it was commodified and controlled in such a way that it could not and would not be distributed to the folks who were working the land. The same thing happened here in the United States in the 1930s. And many of y'all who know about the Dust Bowl, go look it up if you're not familiar with that in the 1930s. And the overproduction of food that was taking place in California at the same time. That was a period in which California started to become the breadbasket, not only of the United States, but for a good stretch of time, the world. Well, they were burning food in California during critical stretches of their period of the 1930s in order to maintain commodity prices, right, rather than give it away. So it's not a question of whether enough food is being produced. We already produce enough food just in the United States alone.
The United States throws away enough food.
Thank you. It was just where I was about to go to. So it's a matter of who owns and controls the means of production and how those who own and control the means of production distribute it for a profit rather than for need. And we are struggling, and what this program is about is to start producing for need to enhance that struggle, but also to prepare our people in our communities for some hard times ahead. And so what we have been warning about, anybody's listened to me the last maybe 10 years have been warning that a movement like the MAGA movement was coming and that it was planning on doing intentional damage, not only to the U.S. economy, to the world economy. And well, as we saw we've been seeing the last 3 months, they mean good on what they have promised, and they are executing. As he himself, as my firstborn says, Cheeto Hitler was promising to wreak havoc, and here it is. And so we need to get prepared, y'all. So I want to go back and start encouraging anybody who is listening to this to start organizing mutual aid collectives, or if you're already in an organization, mobilize it and organize it to start doing mutual aid, but combine that with doing food production on a communal scale. And rather than just talking about food sovereignty, let me try to just sum that up briefly. Emphasize your brief. Look, food sovereignty means being able to produce, in short, it means us as communities being able to produce what we need to take care of our caloric intakes and our health, right? Because food should also be a means to health, not just eating to be full, but to take care of our medical needs, to control diabetes, control all these different things. And I'm stressing the control, because how the current food systems are set up in the United States and other so-called, first world, really the core imperialist countries, food primarily is cheaper in its produced form than it is in its natural state. What do I mean by that? It is often cheaper to get a meal at McDonald's for many, despite its poor nutritional value, than it is to actually go buy, organically fed, cows, or healthy, fruits, vegetables, cheeses, etc., rice, etc., that you need. It's often cheaper to go the other route because of the nature of how the food systems are organized and controlled, as I'll keep referencing. So food sovereignty means breaking that dependence, but we only break that dependence by enhancing local production and then setting up new systems of distribution that align with that production to provide to those who need the most, and a basis that they can either kind of trade value for it, or it is directly affordable. Now, keep in mind, this is not what's the word I'm looking for? This is not like some pie in the sky thing. And despite what most of us have been taught in the United States about the over capacity of the American agricultural might, most food in the world is still produced by small farmers, small producers, throughout the world. And what I want folks to do, just to cite, we're doing more to try to cite resources and folks to understand how a lot of this is already being, played out and experimented in the world. I want everybody to look up La Via Campesina, which is one of the largest social movements on the planet. It is an organization of small producers and farmers all throughout the world, mainly concentrated in Latin America, Africa, and Asia, and understand how they are focusing in. It's them who's kind of really innovated this whole concept of food sovereignty, so folks know and to give credit where credit is due, but also how it's pushed to agroecology, right? Or as we say it sometimes in our movement, Afroecology principles, which some people might know by an earlier term, which has some misappropriation to a permaculture, right? But we want to use the term either Afroecology or agroecology to define it in such a way that you're not relying on production methods that rely on a lot of pesticides, a lot of inorganic fertilizers, where it's just souped up with a bunch of industrial chemicals that produce sometimes tremendous yields, but actually destroy your soils. And remember, or if you didn't know, I'll cite it here, that everything that we call civilization is really dependent upon about 6 inches of topsoil, which takes millions of years for the earth to organically produce. And the nature of the capitalist and imperialist system and its total, I'm going to use the offensive word, rape of the earth and its natural resources, and the total extraction is depleting that soil all over the world, depleting the earth of its water reserves, particularly freshwater reserves, by destroying aquifers. Those are the water that exists underground. Those of you in California should know well of what I'm talking about, how that is potentially being wasted and dried up and overutilized and appropriated by this industrial farming system that the United States employs. We're not talking about replicating that. Let me be clear. We're talking about methods developed by indigenous peoples in various societies over a long period of time, which replenish the soils, keep the nutrients, and keep bountiful yields. But we have to reintroduce those practices, which means repairing the land, restoring ecosystems, right? So when we talk about food sovereignty, you have to also, to be clear, associated with these practices and bringing those into the fray of what you're doing, into the core of what you're doing. But one of the key pieces I want to talk about here, just for the interest of this conversation, for everybody to be clear, we cannot really push this movement or push this whole concept of food sovereignty without really talking about access to land, right? And that is now much more critical than it was, say, even a week before. So I want everybody to be clear about that, because we are going to have to now engage in some serious struggle collectively about accessing land to be able to enhance our productive capacities to meet the broad community need. And this is going to be critical, y'all, because you should expect the price of food to rise in the United States, even by their basic calculations that you can see on CNN and MSNBC, and even Fox has had to admit that the price of food will probably go up about 10% within the next couple of weeks. And that's just a beginning. If this trade war continues to escalate, which personally I don't see that it won't over a period of time. And let me say why. It's not to be a distraction. Number one, China has stated very clearly today they're not backing down, and that they're going to meet Trump and the United States government tariff for tariff, pound for pound, and if necessary, they said round for round. Right? That's where they are at, pushing their agenda. Around maintaining their sovereignty and how they see their role in the global stage and what Trump is trying to break. Now, what folks are clearly going to find out right now, they claim that there are 50 countries, if not more, who are knocking at the door trying to beg them for some tariff relief. They're going to find out very quickly, like Canada and Mexico did. That's not what dude is interested in, right? He wants everybody to come kiss the ring, because this is economics by pure mafioso extraction, right? You're gonna have to pay to play, and there's no way that you can talk about. There's no way folks are going to try to deal with so-called trade imbalances, because that's not how you don't square up trade like that. If somebody makes a better product and they sell it for cheaper within the capitalist system, they're typically going to win unless there's some other type of market intervention or force. So you can't force folks necessarily to take a cheap product or a bad product that comes from the United States, particularly if the United States ain't even prepared to make that at a cheap price point. So this war is going to escalate and continue. And he is off the system. People need to understand it. Go ahead.
I want you to be brief, but this is all your fault, Kali. I share no responsibility in this whatsoever. I feel the need to ask you a question, even though I want you to be. You said China says it is prepared to go not only pound for pound, but round for round. And you've talked about before, of course, the U.S. wants war with China. Can you explain for our audience, and it's me, I'm the audience, how does what we're dealing with lead to actual boots on the ground, tanks, guns, war? How I don't. Other than a bully, what actual war?
The last 300 years of capitalist development, trade wars are often a precursor to actual physical wars. Mm-hmm. Right? You can go back. Let's just say probably the most classic example is World War I, what the Europeans or the North Americans call World War I, right? The first great inter-imperialist wars, what it really was. And what was that about? Carving up the world, and who was going to control what sphere of influence, who was going to be allowed to trade where. But what preceded that was, this is my zone, and you can't trade your goods in my zone, right? Or if you try to trade your goods in my zone, I'm gonna hit you with a tariff and make you pay more for it, right? Mm-hmm. That means somebody's losing out on money, right? And I'm gonna go back to another old LA classic. Playing with my money is like playing with my emotions, right? So he is intentionally riling people up. In this case, he's intentionally trying to rile the Chinese up and make them bow to the United States. But the reality of the situation is what folks need to understand. The United States cannot keep up in almost producing anything with the Chinese. Point blank, period. And if you don't believe me, I want you to go listen to some of the speeches Marco Rubio has given the last couple of weeks, and J.D. Vance gave perhaps one of the most important speeches I've ever heard in my lifetime from a vice president. It was one of the most honest speeches about what globalization, quote unquote, was supposed to do from the imperialist perspective. And he basically laid out when we started doing global trade, and he's going back to the beginning of the Bretton Woods era, it was for the rich to get richer and the poor to get a little bit better. But it didn't turn out that way, right? It didn't turn out that way because the poor, in this case in particular, the Chinese, right, they caught up, and not only caught up, but exceeded and advanced in their productive capacity to become the workshop of the world. From the period in which they kind of, quote unquote, Nixon opened the Chinese up, to start trading and treating with the United States, to where within our lifetime, Tanya, you will well remember starting to see everything from toys to clothes to cars and everything else in the late 70s and in the early 80s being made in China. Right? And that was replacing what we already were growing up with it being so many things being made in Japan. And folks remember that area. And remember in the 1980s how Western capital was hyping up that Japan was outproducing the United States. Now, Japan's productive capacity never yielded, but their market kind of place kind of yielded. And what that has fundamentally meant is that other countries around the world have aggregated their productive capacity to not only match or exceed the United States. And what the United States has been left with and has left itself with, and for that, I want y'all to really to understand that. Well, I want everybody to go look at a video that was done last Friday. I think it's on a show called Dialogue Works, with a masterclass interview about economics, world economics, from Professor Rick Wolff and Michael Hudson, right? Where they really, I think, do a good deal of breaking down everything in layman's terms about how the bond markets may, work, how the United States, from Nixon on, when he destroyed, the peg of the international monetary controls with the gold standard and all that stuff, in 71, and let the dollar float and then tied it to what became the petrodollar, how that, turned the US dollar into like it was already the international monetary, the standard monetary currency, which is still fundamentally plays that role in a decreasing sense, but it still basically plays that role. But that allowed the United States to extract through financial means basically rents from the rest of the world to keep up the quote unquote standard of living in the United States. Well, that has resulted in stagnant wages basically since the 1970s for American workers, and a decreased standing of living for all of us, right? By comparison, even though we may have Xboxes and plasma TVs or whatever the hell is going on, the overall standard of living of what we can afford in terms of housing or health care is far less than what our grandparents and parents were able to kind of receive, those of us listening to this who are in the United States. So we know very clearly there's been a declining standard of living. And this is something Trump himself played upon, I think, in a masterful way during his campaign, but is now utterly betrayed, even though his rhetoric is still, I'm doing this tariffs to try to bring back manufacturing to the United States. Now, he may have some illusion about that in his mind. I don't think he does. I think he knows it's just a good selling point to keep, in particular, the white working class on his side, right, to throw them some meat on the bone. But he's very clear that for instance, we've talked about this before, but I'll restate it again. Folks need to be clear. Like, if auto manufacturing comes back to the United States, it's not going to be a big job producing engine, because most of that is going to be managed by automation and AI. That's who's going to be doing that work, not me or you, not people like me and you, right? Even if they don't particularly have our complexion. That is where that's going to go. And the owner of General Motors even got on the line, and there's a report out where he basically laid out like, yo, this, if you continue with these tariffs in a particular way, you're going to force us to have to raise the cost of our cars 25, 30%, right? Just to pay the wages, or we're going to have to lay folks off and still have to offer this car for more money so that we can stay in business, right? So in a short amount of time, it is the nature of the competition and who's going to win that competition, which is the driving force to war. We need to understand, let me put it plainly, right? Like they talk about the business cycle. You hear that on every major news piece. Well, that business cycle within the capitalist dynamic, if you study it real hard, is also always preceded, preceded and followed. Their boom and bust is also always organized by these major reorganization of capital and capital reserves and the push for new capital stores and new capital stocks to take place to replenish. So it's called creative destruction. And that creative destruction is best facilitated by war. Right? You destroy all the old factories, right? You decimate some of the old terms and relationships, you void all the old contracts, and then guess what? The capital that remains, that stays in place, they set new terms, they create new factories, they start the cycle all over again. That is what they're trying to do and reset it in the U.S. term.
That's why I've heard that phrase before. War is good for the economy.
Good for the economy.
In a capitalist society.
Yep, it's good for the economy. And remember, people should know that the one thing that the United States still clearly has an advantage on is what? The production of military. The
military power, yes.
That's it. And that is even being threatened. And so because if what they just broke down, again, Marco Rubio, go listen to one of his speeches that he gave about 2 weeks ago, where he talked about the United States can't produce one aircraft carrier, and China's producing like 75 a year, or maybe even 75 a month. Right. So that just shows you the disparity of where things are at, even in that field. And part of the rationale we need to be very mindful of and be very clear. Right. If you starting to lose the game by the rules that you set up, and you ain't got no intention on playing fair because you ain't never played fair, then what you gonna do? Right? You're gonna try to fix the game.
I mean, that's why you set up the rules in the first place, to favor you.
You're gonna try to fix the game, right? Or end the game. So that's where we at. I mean, I don't think it takes a whole bunch of complicated analysis. It's good to understand the intricacies of everything that's happening, but at the end of the day, the vicious folks who run the world intend on keeping it in their possession and control, and they have no intention on sharing. It ain't that complicated. Now, and the problem is its impacts affect us, and we got to work our way out of it because they're not going to solve this problem in our favor. And that's why we even try to articulate, laying out a series like this, right? And try to understand and get people to work on how these practices should scaffold in an interrelated way, right? Build upon each other, be integrated in practices on a communal level, so we can work our way out of it. Now, we're not trying to develop. I want everybody to be clear. What we are articulating is not an autarkic program. Meaning that you just retreat into just some localized system of production and only worried about your own. That's not going to save you. Not in this dynamic, because of, again, one of the dynamics of capitalism, it always has to expand, whether that be internally or externally, right?
It has to expand.
Has to expand. And again, short of them colonizing the moon and the asteroids and Mars, they ain't got too much place to expand upon on this a good blue-green Earth. And so, they got to, those who own and controls the means of production are fighting this out in various different ways to reset who's going to be on top. Now, I don't have none of them be on top. And so that's why we're trying to execute a different type of program.
So I asked you that question about war. I cut you off. I'm not even sure where you were. Where were you, Carly? Before I asked about the breakdown of war.
It gets into the critical piece. I was just trying to give a summary in short of what food sovereignty is and some of the components. And the critical piece I want folks to end with there is it's the whole practice is really premised around agroecology, right? And integrating your farmer in a way that's going to actually work with, the ecosystems of the place that you inhabit and getting to know those well. Getting the TEK practices to the best of your ability. But one of the fundamental challenges that folks in a lot of different places have, and where I want to get into, I think the rest of probably the good chunk of this conversation is how do we start accessing land? Because that's the major challenge that I know most folks are going to have, right? And I'm quite sure that most of the people listening to this particular series are folks who live in urban environments where land is not that accessible. So let's talk about how do we start dealing with that, all right?
Okay.
So the first thing, I want you to put up the new graphic, right? And this piece that we've been trying to roll out, you probably have heard me say it before, but I want to start with this first piece. When and wherever we have access to land, stop living to the best of your ability, in the keeping up with the Joneses way, which is just having a bunch of green grass that you got to go out there and water and manicure that don't feed nothing because you ain't got no cows or goats to live in your environment. It's just there for aesthetics. That to use in creating a garden or community farm. Work with your neighbors to start integrating them to do the same. And work on creating forms of exchange between what you produce and they produce. So enough can be kind of a produce of tomatoes or cabbage or kale or greens that can not only feed the family that may occupy that space, but be able to feed other families down the road and trade and exchange and share. Because trust me, y'all, there's this generalized notion out there that in order to survive hard times, that you just got to go stock up on everything, right? and hoard it. And I would tell you right now, because of how rapid I think inflation is going to occur, I would go do some emergency shopping of some essential things. Without question, I would advise people to go do that. But understand that if you want peace, not everybody's going to be able to stock up like you, but they still live in your neighborhood. And if times really get rough, people are going to start roaming around looking for food, which means they might start roaming in your house looking for food. And if you don't have no relationship with them, right, where you can exchange, food for labor, food for security, right, food for childcare, right, you may be in a tough situation where you're in an anti-communal state rather than building a communal state. So I'm not just advising people to start talking to your neighbors to start doing food production just out of, charity, whatever the situation. Nah, you better think about this as an element of your self-defense and communal self-defense. Because when times get tough, you're going to need the people around you to be standing with you, right? Not wondering about whether you're going to, shoot them, snitch on them, steal from them. You're going to need a different dynamic and start getting in the habit of practicing that now. So this is why this first piece around getting in the practice of knowing your neighbor, talking to your neighbor is essential. Old basics. But then let's look at the resources that are already in some utilization or some element that we can control. And that's what this whole piece of make every yard a farm, every garage a factory. Like let's start with the basics of self-reliance that we can kind of build upon and then build out to build more communal systems of self-reliance and self-determination. Like that's the critical piece. Now, knowing that, that's still not going to be enough, right? At least not in an urban area like Los Angeles or Atlanta or Chicago or New York, and even a bunch of mid-sized towns. And this is where we're going to have to start tie this practice in. Where I was talking about the struggle for land. The basic element is around struggling to decommodify land wherever you are. Some of the lowest hanging fruits is start going to the various churches, synagogues, masjids, that exist in your community, to utilize their existing spaces to start putting them into collective productive rotation, right? And even if they don't necessarily have grass or soil, don't let that be a deterrent, right? Because you can set up hydroponic and aquaponic type systems, right? That you could easily create conditions to grow fresh produce, fish, crustaceans, service chickens, even in concrete urban environments with the right knowledge and the right utilization of tools, right? And I would wager, right, going back to the first argument, is that if we seriously look at the abilities that have been built up over the past 30 years, particularly in the area around urban and small farm production. There's people doing this in cities, small towns, suburban areas, all over the place, right? We need to tap into them, get them coordinated, have them teach those of us who don't know how to do this already, so that we can get engaged in this and scale up, and then create systems where we can exchange, as much as possible based upon need, right? And rotational kind of assistance, i.e. the mutual aid component. That is the next kind of critical piece of where we can start, that does not necessarily entail us getting into the immediate conflict with the state or other institutions of capital that don't want this change. But know this, even with that, it's probably not going to be enough. So you cannot avoid, I'm just here to stress, we cannot avoid, at the end of the day, engaging in an element of political struggle around opening up more public space for use. This is where some elements of a core municipalist movement we need to look at and engage. Like the where our program really grows out of a radical kind of municipalist program. We said that we want to set within one local environment, this being in Jackson, how to experiment and extract, and exploring all these things in an integrated way. We still have a long way to go in that regard ourselves. But there are some basics that we have learned and been trying to share through this series around why you need to still kind of have this kind of municipal approach, and what are some of the benefits it could yield. And it's important to start there in most cases than it is trying to do maybe at a state scale, at least for most of us within the United States, because most of us now live in states that are dominated by the Republicans. But we probably, those of us who are listening to this in the main point, or be willing to adopt it, you still primarily live in an area run by Democrats or and other kind of progressive forces, be it the Green Party or Working Families Party, etc. And we can move those forces to move resources on the local level through applied pressure. And applied, we're going to have to do, right? And the first thing is get them to make all available public lands accessible and open it up so that groups and communities and individuals can maybe get plots or working kind of rotational systems to utilize that, to put it in productive use, right? And create, things like farmers markets so that people can exchange or buy what they need within that. But that is a piece that we need to start arguing for now. right, to meet the times and conditions that are coming, well, that are here, but also going to get worse in the days ahead. And the last piece relative to this kind of access to land, like on the municipal level, I would encourage folks to wage a struggle towards decommodifying them and establishing new commons, wherein there's a broad, a democratic orientation around how those lands will be stewarded in the process of this kind of handover and the long-term use, because the economy is being restructured, rearticulated. Trump did that. We are living into an era that the global economy is not going to be the same, and our local economies are not going to be the same after what just took place last week. So we need to start thinking more long term about how do we steward these lands, hold them in common, rather than fighting over them or having capital be able to swoop them up. And a broad, setting up community land trust or land banks or things of that nature need to be fought for so that there's a democratic right and democratic access towards them and reestablishing some commons. These are some critical things that I would put out to everybody, at least within the United States, needs to start arguing and fighting for if you're not doing it already. And I would guarantee you that there's somebody in your community who's already taken this up. Try to find them if you don't know them, where you can align with them in principle. Work with them if not, try to work on opening up spaces in the local environment around you in a broad democratic way.
So we have in the chat, Brooklyn Robbie says, I heard some years back of folks taking over golf courses. Heard of such, I assume?
Oh, yes.
Out here in Los Angeles, California/LA has droughts on a regular. And there have been reports of how golf courses and football stadiums and baseball stadiums use ungodly, obscene amounts of water and then don't pay their water bill. But if I don't pay my water bill, it gets turned off. So I'm not sure how we going to commandeer Dodger Stadium or SoFi Stadium, but there's some golf courses out here that need to be taken over.
Golf courses, parks, right? Abandoned buildings, parking lots. Look, there, abandoned homes, right? There are plenty of spaces, at least in the U.S. context. There's plenty of spaces that could be used and need to be used and either put back into productive use or return back to the ecosystem, right? So that we can create more balance within the local ecosystem, so we can deal with things like drought and the forest fires and things of that nature that I know it just ravaged California, that people are already trying to forget about this quickly, right? But that is on account of terrible land management. And I'm not blaming that on the state. The state facilitates the bad habits of capital to come in and move and develop things in LA, where folks been told us, I wouldn't build there if I were you. I wouldn't do that if I were you. But instead of listening, folks started to build huge mansions up in the hills that just added to the soil erosion, the elimination of species without understanding that those wild species naturally kind of contain a lot of the bush and the brush to keep it from becoming unmanageable and unburnable by eating it off, and making sure that the predators make sure that the herbivores don't their populations don't overgo and create other different kind of problems.
The balance of the ecology,
right? And we have to
imbalance
now conscious of restoring balance, right? And so,
but here's my thing, though.
Go ahead.
I took a trip to Detroit about 10 years ago. It was my first really time out there. And I had never seen so many abandoned homes. And I got so much love for my Detroit people. I apologize. I'm not trying to be disrespectful, but isn't this illegal? How does this is blight. It's an eyesore. It's dangerous. How How do all these houses just sit here? But the other thing I noticed was so many vacant lots, so much green space. And of course, we know about Baba Malik Yakini and the work that, or maybe y'all don't know about Malik Yakini and the work that they're doing in Detroit around food sovereignty and land use and community gardens. But when I see these abandoned buildings here in LA, in Lamert Park and other areas, black areas, where they've just been allowed to sit, the owner isn't getting the price they want for them, or they're chained up, or they're just out and blighted, and they just sit there for decades. The concept of private property. Well, that's that man's building. He could do it in what he wants. I think that if it's in our community and it's not being used and it's an eyesore and it's dangerous, and we have a need, I think we should be able to commandeer that. So the question is, do we commandeer it or do we wait for a law from city council? Because after all, this is private property, you know.
The two are not, I think we got to get it out of here that the two are separate and distinct, right? Now, to the extent that this is a democracy, which we know in truth it ain't, but to the extent that it's supposed to play by certain rules, it is our job to push it and to push the contradiction, right? And part of what we're going to have to introduce, right, is re-articulating our understanding of restoring ecological balance, not just the social balance, you know, and part of what you just said was the social balance and it being an eyesore, all that is true. But in the larger sense of things, right, those things, you know, just sitting there in the state that they're in, they're not dealing with either the carbon cycle or the water cycle in any fundamental way to restore balance. So we have to extend our thinking, Thandi and everybody. I would argue that don't just put that in the communal context of how it relates to people, right? Put it in the broader context of how it should be relating to the environment, how it should be relating to the ecology. And one of the critical pieces around this particular framework, which, you know, because of trying to speak to some of the issues of the present time, and I really wanted to bring home this piece in practice for folks around accessing land. Because if we don't have, you know, the piece where I'm doing that, to reiterate, if folks don't, you know, if we don't assume getting access to sufficient amount of land in real time, then what we are articulating is just kind of a pie in the sky. And we have to change that by changing the conditions on the ground that will enable us to both have access to land to then put these things in practice, right, under the terms and conditions that will meet communal needs. So trying to lay out the different levels and layers, starting from where you're at, your own yard, that of your neighbors, folks on your block, going to the low-hanging fruit, just to reiterate, start with the churches, mosques, other civic organizations that may have institutions, ask them to open it up, share that communal, and then you got to go to the level of where the municipal governments are, where your county government are, to what they have access to. And so the first level is what they have access to. That is kind of nominally under their control. But the other part is what they could have access to. And that is where they could intervene to change the rules around dealing with the blight and deal with either compensating, you know, owners that say, if you're not going to do nothing with this, to put it in some kind of productive rotation, you know, we'll give you a percentage of it or whatever the situation is, or we'll just commandeer it to put it to public, you know, use, one or the other, right? But those are terms and conditions that political movements in each corresponding community need to lay a groundwork on. But get yourself prepared, right? Because, you know, the ownership of land is one of the fundamental bases of where capital resides and how it dictates its terms of you know, the rule of capital, the dictatorship of capital. This is where it has to be broke. So you're not going to invade at the end of the day. We're not going to evade or sidestep having to engage in class struggle on this question. We are, right? Now you may want to build up your ability to you know, go downtown and be able to check those folks by having a political movement that first started with building a relationship to build power with your neighbor, then the other civic groups and other stuff. So you want to aggregate and organize and build up to that particular point. But rest assured, anybody listening to this, at some point for it to be critical, we're going to have to engage in frontal confrontation with the forces of the state and the forces of capital. There's no way around it. So we just need to figure out on whose terms and at what time those battles are going to be engaged, and try to engage them in our term by organizing them based upon meeting people's needs, so that the outcomes when we choose to get there are decisive in our favor. That's the critical piece. I think we want to organize our way to understanding that we're going to have to get there in order to change this system and meet the needs of what people need in the real.
Okay. I'm just taking notes on comments and questions in the chat. Where are we, Kali, in terms of what you wanted to have addressed in today's session?
I think
before I come up with more questions.
No, I haven't been able to keep up with everything in the chat, but I see some good things, there. I think the critical piece I just want to address, and then let's just kind of open it up for questions time, because it's almost, we're almost at the hour, and appreciate it, as always, everybody's time and listening and coming up with stuff. I think the critical piece here that I would just like to end on is utilizing this organizing practice in a way to build local municipal power. But let's not be satisfied with thinking local municipal power is going to be enough to deal with the nature of this overall system, right? We are going to have to build at each level and federate in order to aggregate power to take on the awesome might of capital and United States government, right? We need to be very clear about that. And I'm making an argument against just kind of local utopianism, if you would, right? Or local isolationism. Definitely want folks to build as much strength and perfect, everything you can, come up with prefigurative systems wherever you may be, right? But the thinking that you're going to win this in isolation against, the awesome might of what exists in those two entities I just named, I would encourage you, comrades, to don't delude yourself in that way. And again, I'm gonna bring it back in because it's important. If nothing else in the world is instructive to you, look at what's happening in Palestine today, right? And the determination of, once these folks get challenged a bit, to what extent they will go to maintain control. It's a warning. It is a warning. And I want you to think for yourself, regardless of whether you agree with the political ideology of the Palestinian resistance, right? And because rest assured, whether you agree with it or not, and the Palestinians, the factions in the West Bank, the factions in Gaza, they haven't been in perfect alignment for quite some time. Don't matter at all to the damn Zionists, right? They on a genocidal program, regardless of you at one point tried to have peace with them, or whether you decided you was always just going to duke it out. Doesn't really matter. Their true objectives and aims are becoming clear. That's not a particular case that's special and unique, because look at how Trump is threatening Iran. Look at how he's threatening Greenland. All right? Greenland
only got 2 people. Why are you threatening them?
Probably because he just figured I can, right? So we are at a phase, right, where basically his faction, I'm talking about Trump, his faction of capital is saying they're surrendering being the global cop, and they just going to bunker down into their zone and try to control it. If that's what it fundamentally comes down to in the race for materials. But the point is, don't make, because there's a way in which, that struggle gets caught up in a particular focus on whether you are anti-Semitic or not, in a distorted way about how that term has come to be politicized and weaponized in a very distorted and aggravated sense. This really to look at it on a global scale ain't got nothing to do with that particular piece, or to isolate it in some special way. right? The terms of control are the same everywhere, right? Like I'm saying, why I'm citing Greenland. Like, in Trump's mind, I'm going to get there one way or another, right? We're going to colonize that space and take it over because we want the raw minerals. We want a strategic positioning. We want to be able to control the Arctic Sea to make sure that Russia and China don't have access to bypass our control, from their perspective. So, we need to put that in mind and be very clear about what it is ultimately we're going to come up against, because you got to prepare yourself mentally, and we got to prepare those around us, right? For what's coming down, and we are at a disadvantage. A lot of our social movements in the United States are at a disadvantage because there's been kind of a bubble and a shelter of a kind against the type of violence you might see, taking place, right now in the Congo or in Palestine, and other places on the earth. We have built shelter from that, but that don't mean you will be sheltered forever, and definitely don't fall into the logic of American exceptionalism, right? And thinking certain things cannot happen here or won't happen here. They are happening here now, right? Because times have changed, and they need to change how they rule to maintain their position. So we need to get ready for that and be prepared to federate and build political organization on a new basis in a way that we have not thought about it in a while. And I'll end with this and then open up for questions, because I'm going to this piece. Do not think that the Democratic Party is going to come up with any solution that is going to help us anytime soon. Give up that false notion and that fantasy, right? Do not fall for that trick again, please. I implore you, right? And I'm speaking not on the basis of pure ideology, if you would. I want everybody to just, think back to, the summer of the George Floyd rebellion, and how they twisted that social movement and what it was demanding on the heels of the pandemic, right? And the longstanding calls for quote unquote racial justice, for Black and brown people, into a narrow campaign of anybody but Trump, to get themselves elected, and then didn't change anything, right? Didn't really campaign to change anything. So don't fall for that Kool-Aid again. This program requires that everybody organize autonomously outside of either of the duopolies of capital in this country. And I want everybody to be clear on that in terms of what we are aiming to create. The federation is of autonomous communities and political formations, treating with each other and negotiating with each other, federating each other to aggregate power against those two forces, very clear and specific.
All right, so I've got 5 o'clock my time, and you have a hard stop at 5:30. You got to get out of here and go do something else. So I'm going to run on over here to the, well, I'm not going to run. I'm going to mosey on over here to the chat and see what some folks are talking about. So yeah, we know that there are minerals there. It's another, piece of natural resource with natural minerals. But I thought this was an interesting comment, that AI uses computer servers that have an impact on the ecology, on the environment.
That's right.
Because of all of the heat that they use and release into the atmosphere. So how they contribute to climate change. Now, I don't know if he necessarily want to just stick a bunch of servers in Greenland, but I did want to at least highlight that comment.
Well, a good number of U.S. military servers that stuff is already up in Iceland, Greenland, and some of those islands. That's already the case. And some of the world's seed banks, some of them of a private nature, some of them, through UN kind of administered programs. They started setting, one of them, the most famous one, they started setting it up in the early 1990s. Trying to make sure that in case there was some kind of, a catastrophic extinction level event, that there will be enough of the quote unquote the genetic material, the seeds, to kind of repopulate the earth. And that one is already being threatened by climate change now, even though because they didn't plan or anticipate the permafrost being melted that quickly. So, this is the problem. Because a lot of their equipment, this data processing stuff requires massive amounts of energy. It requires these massive kind of storage pieces that they don't, in the long term, I would argue, they don't really have a clear program of how they're going to deal with that, other than just keep polluting at an ever greater rate.
Now, I know I always say to you, be brief, but this has brought up something for me. So I'll try to be brief. I just started watching because I was bored. I think it's on Hulu, this show called Paradise with Sterling K. Brown.
I've heard of it. I haven't watched it.
I didn't want to watch it because, once again, it's the black folks trying to save empire. But I got bored and I continued to watch the show. And basically, they talk about this big chunk of the ice sheet, the glacier in Antarctica or somewhere, falls off into the ocean. And now a giant tsunami is wreaking havoc all over the world. Giant earthquakes in California. I think California breaks off. But the tsunami hits the eastern seaboard and puts everything underwater. So a group of billionaires, led by one particular billionaire, has commissioned the building of a city deep underground in Colorado, and it's called Paradise. So once they get the information that the tsunami is coming to DC, Philly, etc., in about 2 hours, they hop in their choppers and they all go underground to their new location. And they don't want people to know that there are actually survivors after this catastrophic event that has happened to the U.S. up above. And so it gets all entangled with a murder plot to kill the president who wants to tell the world it's survived. All of that matters. And that's why Sterling Brown, who's Secret Service, his job is to guard the president, his best friend. You know how they do it all. So once you get all past it, I just thought it was interesting that they went with the climate, the possibility of an extinction level event happening due to climate change here in the U.S. I said I was going to be brief. Let me hush.
Well, we are already facing an extinction level. We're living through a mass extinction. We need to be clear about that. Right now, we are already living through a mass extinction. And the capitalist system has only aggravated that further. Because there's one part of it which was, the degree to which humanity has contributed to like the megafauna and all that stuff dying off, that's probably going to be debated, forever. I think clearly some role of our ancestors in different places play, some contribution to that. But most of that, we could safely say, based upon our current knowledge and understanding, was as a result of an earlier area of rapid climate change, right? So, this little period of little in the terms of geologic time, let me be clear, but this little period of like the last 25,000 years, a stable, warm environment is supposed to basically just be a break between a deep kind of interglacial period. Basically another ice age should be on the way, right? But the amount of carbon, methane, and other gases that the capitalist system over the last 200 years has put in the environment has probably forestalled that or created, kind of feedback loops that nobody quite understands, and we probably don't have the capacity to model out or model out sufficiently. And I say that on the basis of, most of the climate models that they started really predicting and putting their kind of supercomputer capacity and all their best minds to in the 1990s and up into the 2000s, where we've already exceeded most of those targets, right? And one of the things that's been buried, a story that's been buried the last couple of weeks, I think the Guardian had the most clear, for all of his problems, the Guardian had the most clearest article that I saw about not only is this the warmest, year kind of already on record, but the pace of carbon emissions is already exceeding by all bounds, and there's no way that we can stay. We've already shattered, I think, the 1.5. They were saying that there's no way to come back from that. So any good science fiction right now is going to be trying to give people a warning about a pending and urgent climate catastrophe, because in truth, comrade, that's where we already at, right? It's not like climate change is coming and climate catastrophe is here. Right? Y'all just experienced a dose of it in Los Angeles. To be clear, and for folks who don't, I'm an LA boy originally, and for folks who don't understand how part of that works, the dry season in LA is in June through October. That fire was in
January. Winter. Right. Allegedly winter here in California.
Right? The cold months, the wet months, right? It typically rains in Los Angeles, at least in the period that I grew up. It typically rains through January and February. And we might not likely get another good drop of rain, right, until sometime around like November in a good year. So this was doing, in part, supposed to be a rainy season. So I'm just citing this so folks understand in real time from experiences that people have had, like me and you have had in our lifetime. So we understand like the rapid nature of how this is all collapsing in our eyes, right in front of our eyes. And we keep trying to evade it. And so I want to come back to this piece around food sovereignty, because if the larger piece of what I really wanted to entail, and we'll come back to it in due time. But one of the critical pieces around the scaffolding of the build and fight formula to really try to build a more eco-socialist oriented future is this is the place where there has to be a clear focus on restoration to deal with climate change, right? And restoring soils, right? Decolonization, right? Renativizing, our ecosystems, like restoring native plants in all of our ecosystem to reset the balance, to get things back in gear, to deal with the carbon cycles, to deal with the water cycles, to put that all in perspective. Those are some critical things that, in a full layout of what food sovereignty entails, at least in the way that we are trying to articulate it, it will be those particular pieces. You have to also focus in on a bioregional program, right? Including how you relocalize your food production to bring those back in line, which would mean for many of us kind of some radical shifts in our diet, which ultimately will be necessary because the way the globalized food piece goes in the long term, it is not sustainable, y'all. Hell, in the short term, most of what we're doing is not sustainable, and people are going to find some of this out real quickly with these tariffs, right? Because I don't think people fully understand how integrated the food economy is with the world economy. So your little coffee that you like, ain't no coffee grown in the United States except for in some greenhouses somewhere, right? There's not a product that grows here. Not that many bananas grow here, right? A whole bunch of fruit, even things that you might think should be grown here or traditionally grown here, like blueberries, raspberries, blackberries, strawberries. Most of that in the United States is grown in Mexico, or most of that's consumed in the United States is grown by Mexico or further out. So folks gonna learn real quick how integrated things are, right? And the detriment of how some things got built in the way that it was built. Not that facilitating, exchange between people, I'm trying to imply in any form, is a negative. It is not, right? I think people should be free to exchange on principle equal terms, but that is not how this global system was built. It was built to exasperate and highlight inequalities and to lock them into a system of super exploitation. We need to break that. That is part of what this system that we've been articulating is trying to get at. And so at a later date, we'll try to go more specifically into this piece around the full kind of component of food sovereignty and what it can kind of entail programmatically that includes all of these particular points. But again, I just want to focus in today. Folks need to start struggling in the here and now to meet immediate needs next couple of weeks to the next 2 or 3 years, if not longer, given the profound shift that we are living through, later basis of being able to start producing en masse, right? And that means going after re-articulating our relationship to the land that are immediately in our communities that we could and should have access to, that we're going to have to fight for.
How do we build access to land across political ideologies and danger? For instance, money is being offered to a garden group I'm a part of from a Zionist org that says they're only about food access here.
Good question. Good question. Number one, part of the core piece, to put it in stark material terms, we should try to be, and I would encourage all of you to try to be as self-reliant in the pursuit of food sovereignty as possible. And that starts with taking some portion of the resources, including your financial resources, and putting them into collective pools or collective sharing, so that you're not dependent upon outside groups like this group to come in and fund everything, right? Now, if they want to lend or not, well, if they want to contribute, I wouldn't say lend. If they want to contribute on the basis of you maintaining your political and ideological sovereignty, then that's your democratic, choice or right to choose. But understand, most money comes with strings attached, right? Do not be fooled in thinking that it don't, right? And those strings could just be subtle expectations, unstated expectations. Be mindful of that and try to clear the terms of, I'm making this contribution to achieve X, Y, and Z. And I'm expecting you to make this contribution to attain X, Y, and Z. This is how we're going to mutually benefit. Lay out all the cards on the table as you possibly can. And I'm also stating that so we can deal with working across ideologies of the left, right? Dealing with across ideologies, in general, like with the right, that's a whole nother conversation and subject. But starting more insular in this particular case, how do, revolutionary nationalists and anarchists and socialists and communists, how should we come to terms with each other? I would argue that we have to do it along principle lines. And the first principle should be that we are aiming to produce for use, for broad communal use, and not for profit. Now, that doesn't mean that some of the things that we might produce collectively won't be sold. The reality of it is we are going to have to produce some things in the here and now within the system that we are currently embedded in, to buy more seeds, right? To treat for things that we can only exist, at least for now, on the quote unquote open market. But the point is, we need to be thinking again around food sovereignty in the work that we're doing. Are we producing enough to go to seed that we can do this and regenerate itself and not be dependent upon having to go to Lowe's or Home Depot year in and year out, cycle in and cycle out for the seeds that we need, right? Can we create our own seed banks? We're going to have to. That's the answer. The answer to the question, we're going to have to figure that out and to start thinking about doing that. But alive first upon the basic principles of communal need. And I would stress the first piece is getting people to a table to agree upon we're going to produce this to meet broad human need, and then we have to deal with the elements of how we want to do distribution in regards to dealing with that need, and not set up these kind of crazy value-based systems which might say that, well, this homeless person wants to come in and gain food but didn't contribute a penny or didn't contribute any labor, right? that gets you into the charity zone and in the discriminatory zone. But if we're producing for human need, we're producing for human need. And we're trying to create relationships with people over time. It's not going to be instantaneous, but we can be in relationship with folks to transform all of our behaviors, not just one person's behavior, all of our behaviors. So there's alignment around principles that I think we are going to have to orient ourselves around, and what the objectives are in relationship to those principles is where I would say to start. I'm not saying it's going to be easy, right? Because all of our tendencies come with issues that sometimes can be hard to overcome. The movements come with histories of us often attacking, undermining, even killing each other that we're going to have to contend with. But if we want to come out of this, without capital dictating, we're going to have to figure this out one way or another.
What ways can folks get water for agriculture? Droughts, water catchment against code or law? What are some ideas and solutions you have seen?
I'm going to put it this way to not get nobody in trouble. You have to be creative. Be creative as you can be. And where there's, one of the pieces I have, you can't do none of this without access to water. So I'm glad Michelle brought this up, right? And again, that's where it goes back to the municipal level of engagement that ultimately we're going to have to get to, right? Now we need to, I think in every area, I can say in our case, Jackson has some major water issues, and how we've been trying to deal with those, and it's still a system that we're learning, trying to perfect, and climate change has impacted it. So we've got these huge water tanks that we put on basically almost all of our CLT, properties, all of our properties, to deal with food production there, but also to be a recourse for when there are acute moments of a water crisis, that we can distribute it that way and not be distributed water to the community and not be dependent upon going to go buying water from Costco or Lowe's, which we've done in the past, to try to give out to be a immediate form of relief. We want to get past that. And so we try to invest in, all right, we have a little bit of money, let's build these tanks, let's do some water catchment systems, and then let's utilize it in the most creative ways possible to meet human needs, right? But we have to build up levels of education and defense around that, so folks know what is the appropriate use of these things, how do we do it, so that we stay within the confines of what the state is trying to impose upon us. But our ultimate aim is to respect the need of what people, how would you put it, to respect what people need, right? Not the limitation of what the law imposes. Right. So that's why I'm saying, I'm not going to try to get nobody directly in trouble, but you're going to have to be creative in many communities where they have outlawed water catchment, at least for drinking water, right?
Well, I mean, I'm not saying I don't.
For farming.
I'm not saying I don't believe you, but if it's that serious, I doubt somebody gonna be like, well, Kylie Akuno on YouTube said I should do this. I mean, come on, man, stop it. Just stop.
Yeah,
y'all.
They will.
Come on, y'all. Come on, y'all. Come on. No, I'm not talking about the authorities. I'm talking about the people. The people doing the catchment.
Come on, about the people. Since we're doing this publicly, there's enemies watching this as well, right? And some of them recently came on my post on X for a piece around, telling folks that they need to challenge, intervene. Don't just let them, roll up on folks and disappear them and just, record with your video. I was saying, like, no, intervene. Right, engage in some questions, some nonviolent direct action. There are means and methods that we can employ to defend our people that we got to put in some use. And so that got reported to the FBI on that. So, look, they got their brown shirt forces out there.
I got you.
We need to be mindful that Trump knew exactly what he was doing by pardoning all those January 6 folks. He created a brown shirt effect right then and there. We need to be mindful of that. Because the message that sent very clearly, if you do something in my name and my interest, right? If I give certain orders and I want to deploy militia-like forces to exact justice or to enforce the rules that I want to enforce that may go against contrary to what the courts may tell me, and I'm citing things in which he's already doing, y'all. I ain't making nothing up. What that message clearly sent, if you go and you put people in check, I got your back. I'll get you covered. So this is the political reality we live in. And even though it ain't graduated per se to some of these levels of violence, best believe it easily could. Because just think, let me put it this way: if I'm halfway right, Thandi, and the price of food goes up 50, 60%, right, and say the next 50, 60, 5 or 6 months, it's going to be a lot of angry people out there, right? And they're going to have to resort to different measures and means to keep people in check. Because what just took place on, what was the 5th? Right? It looked like to me, I haven't read all the reports, but it looked like a couple of million people turned out to protest against Trump, against Elon Musk and Doge and some of the stuff that they're doing. Well, if people get more confident, that's only going to grow, right? And as things get more acute in terms of the pain that the people in the United States are going to feel, at the pump and at the grocery store, right? And with the utility companies, if he ain't planning on leaving, if he ain't planning on surrendering to public pressure, if he ain't planning on surrendering to democratic control, what else is left than to start first deploying the brown shirts to put folks in check? So we best not be naive, y'all. That's my point I'm trying to drive home, right? And be mindful, be strategic, but meet the need and rise to the occasion. That is what we're gonna have to get at, right? We have to build the capacity to challenge these things, right? Just challenging on an individual basis is not going to be sufficient, y'all, because they can pick people off one by one. But get into this, it's one thing if you just only got 1 or 2 people creating these water catchment systems, say in a community, that could be targeted. But if we got, say, like Inglewood, I'm gonna target Inglewood out. If you got like 10,000 people in Inglewood working on this program, starting to do water catchment systems and put them to public use, and then communities that are working with them and relying upon those systems to meet certain needs, that exacts a political force that, if mobilized, right, would be far harder for the system to put down or criminalize in any fundamental way. So we have to think about how do we aggregate our power to execute any of this, right? And then challenging the law becomes a question of force. I'm gonna go to Marx, or Engels actually said that at a certain point, right, when laws are in conflict or when rights are in conflict, force is what decides. We are getting to that point. Trump and his forces already understand it. Bannon is clear about the type of force that him and his movement and his forces should be executing. We got to get clear on that on our end.
Mm-hmm. I have 5:25, sir. What do you want to do?
I think there was one last question that got put up that was trying to go through that, didn't answer.
I actually let it go because we were coming down to the wire.
Well, let's do this just in the interest of time.
Mm-hmm.
I hope this was helpful. We have tried to adjust a little bit in the practical terms to move people, I think, to a political space to meet, the necessity of what's going to occur and arise as a basis of Trumpflation of what's coming down. We got to get out there and start organizing on new scales. I do fundamentally want to propose that the full complement of what we're calling the if you can put that up again, the program, the practices of position, that these are some fundamental. This outline of a program constitutes some core things that can help us fight against Trumpflation and all of the social consequences that are going to come. But it's going to require us organizing on a mass scale. Right, and that means you got to start where you are, but you got to build and aggregate. And I want to implore folks that, with them cutting so many federal jobs, the state level cuts on the result of the resources depleting from that are going to come next. So there's going to be more unemployment, and instead of folks kind of lamenting look at that as let's find ways to put more of our time capacity into these productive activities on our own accord to meet the need. So there's a flip of the mind that I think we want to try to engage in around, seeing time as that we might have to do certain things as an asset rather than a liability, but that requires a mental shift. So I want to try to get folks to start thinking about that in terms of, how we're reaching out to folks, how we want to try to bring them into organization and bring them into struggle in this next period. And the one of the critical pieces is divesting people of some illusions. And that big illusion is thinking that the Democratic Party is going to come and do something to save us. Don't drink that particular Kool-Aid. And with that, Thandi, I'll say, we're going to be doing this again next month.
On a different topic, but all part of the Build and Fight program.
Fight. So if you can put that up, just so folks have that and see what the next one is going to be about, worker self-organization and self-management in this period, and what type of broad, really working class organization is going to be needed to, deal with owning and controlling the means of production. That's fundamentally what that piece is going to be kind of oriented around, and how we need to gear ourselves up for this new moment, that's coming, because there's already some signs and indication in the market that a recession is here. I think it's going to be far worse, far larger than what we experienced in 2008, 2009. And those of you, I think everybody listening to this was alive then and experienced then. So recall what that impact that had and bring it up to scale. Remember, one of the critical things that came out of that was the Occupy movement, the Indignados movement, that wave that occurred. Let's think of this in a prefigurative way and try to get ahead of it now. It's hard to predict what might, pop off. In my experience, working with folks like Max Ramo and Desha Giucali and Brandon King and many other folks. I'm not going to try to name everybody here who worked with us. We tried to initiate this national Take Back the Land piece and call for on May Day of what was it, 2009. We tried to encourage folk to do land occupations. Then we were able to do a fair number. We thought that was going to pop off in the way that Occupy did. That didn't, take place. I think we were heading in the right direction, but just not the right issue per se. But this is drawn from that experience and many others, in trying to get us to prepare. Is what this series is about, to prepare for what's coming and to be in a better position for an outcome that we should determine. Because, I'm a borrow from Gil Scott in the closing. We should put ourselves in the best, position to create the future that we want, rather than just be subject to it.
So I'm getting lobbied for one more question. And actually, I don't want to clown Kali, but since he's my brother, I can clown him. Somebody said, just one more question briefly. I'm like, Kali can't do brief. He can do your question, but he's not going to answer it briefly. So what you want to do, Kali?
I'll do my best.
Question?
I'll do my best. 2 minutes. 2 minutes. I got the rope.
Okay. Ashley Knuckles wants to know, what is Kali's stance on farmers using sliding scale CSA pricing, charging above market price to higher income customers and institutions, and free boxes for low-income neighbors? Is this in line with the Build and Fight formula?
Yes and no. And again, you know me well. Look, I'll try to be as brief in this case as possible. To deal with the variances in income and accessibility, market accessibility based upon income and spending power, that is a good way to subsidize folks and to keep prices in control. That is not something in the long term we want to be dependent upon. Ultimately, we are trying to balance out the income as a differential, period. And that is what we should be working towards enhancing overall everybody's overall productive capacity, and that means, bringing more of our skill to bear in the market, but not having that be mediated by prices and or wages, and the extraction of our value, right? Our wage labor in this particular point. I'm probably getting a little too technical and a little too Marxist for maybe some, but the basic thing is we don't want to continue living in a world where there are some who have profound more income and access to resources and wealth than there are others. And that is, we want to get away from having to subsidize things because we've actually built common where things could be exchanged upon, from each according to their ability, to each according to their need.
I didn't do this in the beginning, but now that we've come to the end, for those of you who stuck with us and for those of you who'll be watching this later, like, share, and subscribe to this video. Like it here on Black Liberation Media, like it on Cooperation Jackson's YouTube channel, like it on my channel, Rootwork. Share this link, share this information with individuals and organizations you are working with or plan to work with. This is not something that can be done in isolation. This is actually an action plan that Cooperation Jackson has been working on and believes will lead to a transformation if we can get on board, all of us, in some way, shape, form, or fashion. Also, look at the bottom of the screen. If you want to support self-sufficiency and sustainability, hit up the Venmo and PayPal of Cooperation Jackson the same way you hit up my Cash App, my Venmo, and Black Liberation Media's Cash App, Venmo, etc., Patreon, because we're going to have to fund this ourselves. No grants, fund this ourselves, folks. So yeah, hit up Cooperation Jackson's love buttons, which are scrolling at the bottom of the page. Like, share, and subscribe. Kali, we're coming back in May. And what are we going to be talking about in May?
We're going to be talking about worker self-organization, self-management. You can put those two pieces up, those last two pieces, so we can leave folks with that. You can find these are going to be up on our website soon and all of our social media. But that is going to be May 13th. So be on the lookout for us. We'll try to sharpen this up continuously and make it as relevant to the times. I anticipate there'll be some major worker upheaval, so it'll be right on time, to kind of plug into that and provide examples. So be on the lookout, y'all. And thank everybody for tuning in. Definitely spread the word. If you found this helpful, repost it. Like, share, subscribe, as Thandi said, and get your family, friends, organizations, comrades, all on it. So we can start escalating the struggle.
All right. Thank you again, Kali, for your time. Thank you, all of y'all, for tuning in and for hanging out with us. We will catch you on the next one. Peace.